1843, Yorkshire. The rain had been falling for days, turning the narrow streets into rivers of mud. On the edge of town stood St. Bartholomew's Orphanage, a crumbling stone building that leaned against the wind like an exhausted pilgrim. Inside, 17 children slept in a single room lit by a dying candle. Their breaths rose and fell in uneven rhythm, soft as whispers. Only one remained awake. His name was Elias, a thin boy with sunken eyes and a face too old for his age. He sat upright, clutching a wool blanket to his chest, staring at the cracked window. The night outside looked alive. When the clock struck 12, a draft swept through the room, snuffing the candle. Darkness swallowed everything. Elias heard a sound, a faint rattle like a spoon dropped on wood. Then silence. One by one, the breathing stopped. The following morning, the caretaker entered with a bucket of water and froze. 17 small bodies lay motionless beneath the gray light, lips blue, eyes open. Only Elias sat upright in his bed, shivering. The doctor from the parish examined the children and declared food poisoning. But the bread was fresh, the milk untouched. No explanation could satisfy the horror. Rumors spread quickly through Yorkshire. Some said the orphanage had been built on cursed ground, once belonging to a family executed for witchcraft. Others whispered that the boy had brought the death himself, that he was born of sin. When questioned, Elias said nothing. His stare unsettled everyone. The priest tried prayers, the doctor tried medicine, but the child remained hollow, unblinking. They buried the others that same evening, in shallow graves behind the chapel. As the last coffin was lowered, the gravedigger heard something tapping from below, soft but steady. It stopped only when the priest began the final blessing. Weeks passed and the town returned to its routines, pretending the nightmare was over. Yet strange things continued. Cows gave sour milk, children woke screaming, and candles in the church flickered without wind. One night, a nun tending the empty orphanage swore she saw small footprints on the corridor floor, wet, muddy, leading toward Elias's empty bed. When dawn came, the prints were gone, but the bed was damp, and the pillow bore the imprint of a small head. The priest found a single note beneath it, written in a shaky hand: "Forgive the child." No one ever saw Elias again. Some say he fled into the moors. Others believe he never left that place at all. The orphanage was abandoned soon after, its windows boarded, its name erased from parish records. But the villagers still avoid it, claiming that on cold nights, if you press your ear to the walls, you can hear the faint scratching of tiny hands beneath the floor, still begging to be remembered. Weeks turned into months, yet the tale of St. Bartholomew's refused to fade. The church silenced every mention, the papers printed nothing. But the townspeople could not forget the sight of 17 small coffins lowered into the frozen soil. Children avoided the road that led to the orphanage, claiming they could hear humming through the fog. The melody was faint, like a lullaby sung underwater. At night, lights were seen flickering in the abandoned dormitory, though no one dared to enter. The constable who guarded the grounds said he often felt a hand tug at his coat when he turned his back. One evening, he followed the sound of footsteps to the garden. There, beneath the twisted oak, lay the small wooden cross marking Elias's bed. A toy horse sat beside it, freshly carved, its surface damp with rain. No one admitted placing it there. Rumor said Elias still roamed the moors at dusk, barefoot, his eyes glowing with reflection from lantern light. A shepherd swore he saw the boy standing near the riverbank, his clothes dry despite the storm. When he approached, the figure vanished, leaving only small footprints that led nowhere. Scholars who later studied the case found a curious detail. The same number of deaths had occurred in that building exactly a century earlier, when it was a plague refuge. 17 patients then, 17 children now. The coincidence was dismissed, yet the pattern lingered like a shadow. Locals began to speak of the 17th hour, believing that each year, on the night of the tragedy, the souls of the children returned to count the living. Doors would open, clocks would stop, and the air would fill with the scent of burnt milk. Even decades later, travelers passing through Yorkshire reported hearing a child's voice whispering from nowhere, "Not all of us slept." When historians rediscovered the orphanage records in 1921, they found an unsigned report describing faint traces of arsenic in the well water, but the handwriting matched that of the town's priest, who had died before the investigation began. The case was labeled inconclusive, but the townsfolk had already decided their truth. The orphanage was cursed, and the boy had been its vessel. To this day, no one has managed to locate his grave. The few who tried claimed to hear laughter echoing through the fog before their lanterns went out. And when light returned, the ground was disturbed, as though something beneath had been moving. The story of Elias became a warning passed through generations. Never leave milk uncovered at night. Never trust a child who does not blink, and never, under any circumstance, walk past the orphanage when the church bell strikes 12, for the dead may still be counting. The year was 1843, and Yorkshire was a place suspended between poverty and superstition. Its towns were small, its fields endless, and its people weary from years of harsh winters and failed harvests. Amidst this landscape stood St. Bartholomew's Orphanage, a decaying refuge for unwanted children. It had been founded half a century earlier by a widow named Margaret Hale, after her own family perished in a fire. The townspeople spoke kindly of her charity, yet behind her saintly reputation lingered whispers of obsession. Margaret believed that salvation could only be earned through suffering. Every child she took in was made to pray on cold stone floors until their knees bled. When she died, the orphanage passed into the hands of the church, but the building itself seemed to retain her spirit, an air of mourning that seeped into its walls. By 1843, the orphanage had fallen to neglect. Its funds were thin, its caretakers fewer, and its food nearly gone. The children slept two to a bed, their blankets damp with mildew. They ate what little they were given and thanked God for it. Most of them had been left at the doorstep as infants, swaddled in rags, nameless. Only one arrived differently. Elias appeared on a stormy night in October, delivered by a man no one recognized. He said nothing, left no note, and vanished before dawn. The boy was 6, thin as a ghost, with black hair that curled against his forehead. He never spoke of where he came from. Some said his parents were criminals. Others thought he had no parents at all. The matron, Sister Agnes, claimed his eyes were the color of smoke, and that he did not blink when candlelight hit them. The priest assigned to the orphanage, Father Jonathan Price, believed the child was a test of faith. He often kept Elias near during evening prayers, perhaps out of pity or perhaps out of fear. Town records described Father Price as a quiet man burdened by debt, haunted by scandal in his former parish. St. Bartholomew's was meant to be his redemption, yet it would become his ruin. Winter arrived early that year. The river froze before December, and with it came illness. The baker who supplied the orphanage died suddenly, and so did 2 of the nuns who worked in the kitchen. Their deaths were blamed on spoiled flour, though no proof was ever found. Rumors spread that the land itself was poisoned, cursed since the days when witches were burned in the nearby woods. The townsfolk avoided the road to the orphanage, crossing themselves when they heard the church bell toll from its tower. Inside, Sister Agnes kept careful notes in her journal. Those pages, later recovered by investigators, described strange happenings in the weeks before the tragedy. She wrote of shadows that moved without light, of children murmuring in their sleep, of candles extinguished by unseen breath. On the final night she wrote it all, her last entry read, "The boy does not sleep. He watches the others as though waiting for something. I think he knows." After that, the journal ends abruptly, the ink trailing off mid-sentence. When it was found years later, the page was torn, and beneath it, faintly pressed into the paper, was a single word written in reverse: "Forgive." The town's heartbeat slowed after the tragedy. The air of Yorkshire carried a silence that even the church bells feared to disturb. Locals whispered that the old brick orphanage was cursed, that something dark had lingered in its walls long before the children died. But to the officials, it was merely an unfortunate event. They sealed the doors, burned the linens, and buried the victims in a shallow patch of frozen earth. No priest spoke their names aloud. Only one name remained in the record books: Thomas Whitby, the forgotten orphan. His testimony was confusing, fragmented by fear. He said he saw them drink the tea and heard them fall asleep. But when pressed to describe who gave the tea, he fell silent. Every witness account conflicted. Some said a woman had visited the orphanage days before, a pale stranger wearing a black bonnet. Others swore she never existed at all. Weeks turned into months. Investigators came from London but found nothing except spoiled food, broken cups, and one note written in chalk on the kitchen wall: "Mercy for the condemned." The handwriting didn't match any of the caretakers. Even stranger, every animal in the area, cats, dogs, and birds, had vanished overnight. The place felt hollow, as if the ground itself had exhaled its soul. When winter ended, Thomas was sent to live with a farmer named Edmund Price, a man who had once donated bread to the orphanage. The villagers avoided the boy. They said he spoke to shadows, that he sat by the barn whispering to someone no one could see. He grew quiet, watchful, and at night he refused to sleep indoors. "It smells like poison," he told the farmer's wife. Nobody believed him. Years passed, but the deaths never left him. The nightmares returned each winter, and always the same image: 17 pale faces lying side by side, eyes open, as if waiting for something. The parish recorded no further deaths linked to the orphanage, but whispers continued about unmarked graves beyond the chapel fence. Travelers claimed to hear children's laughter from beneath the soil. In 1848, a local physician named Dr. Hargreaves reopened the case privately. He found that the tea served that night contained traces of arsenic, but the source was impossible to trace. No supplier, no purchase records, nothing. The containers themselves had disappeared. The physician's report ended abruptly with the words, "The curse remains active." He vanished the following week, leaving behind only his journal and a broken pocket watch, stopped at 3:11 a.m. Thomas, now 16, returned once to the orphanage ruins. He left flowers for the dead and found, buried in the ashes of the kitchen, a small porcelain cup with his initials carved inside. That night, people saw lights flickering in the windows again. The building had no candles, no lanterns, yet the glow persisted until dawn. Locals said the orphan's presence awakened what had been sleeping there. The authorities ignored the talk, but an old caretaker summed it up best. "Yorkshire forgets nothing. The dead here don't stay quiet." The ruins of the orphanage stood untouched for years, a skeleton of stone where children once slept. Wind moved through broken windows like whispers of the lost. In 1850, a group of townsmen decided to rebuild the chapel nearby, but the ground resisted them. Tools broke, soil refused to turn, and one worker collapsed, claiming he'd seen 17 figures standing at the edge of the field, watching in silence. They called it superstition, yet the foreman never returned after that day. Villagers began avoiding the road that passed the orphanage even in daylight. Horses would stop and refuse to move forward, eyes wide, muscles trembling. At night, faint voices rose from the earth, calling names no one recognized. Some said it was the wind over the moors. Others swore it was the children calling for mercy. The forgotten orphan, Thomas Whitby, grew older but remained tied to the place. He never married, never left Yorkshire, and every year on the anniversary of the deaths, he walked alone to the old gate and left bread and milk on the steps. People mocked him, called him the curse boy, but he never responded. One night, a traveler offered him shelter, and Thomas whispered, "They still drink the tea when the fog returns." The traveler left at dawn, pale and trembling. Rumors spread that Thomas carried the poison in his blood, that whoever touched him would dream of the 17 dead. The church declared him beyond saving. The priest refused confession, but behind the cruelty was fear. Everyone who tried to dig on the orphanage land became ill. Their hands blistered, their teeth blackened. A doctor from Leeds took soil samples, claiming he'd find the truth. He never published his results. His assistant reported that the samples hissed when opened. That year, rain turned the fields black and livestock refused to graze near the fence. Letters from that period mention a strange light over the moor, moving slowly like a lantern carried by an invisible hand. By 1852, Yorkshire called the place the Sleeper's Field. The children's names were erased from church records, replaced with a single word: condemned. Those who remembered them were said to hear knocking on their doors at night. 3 knocks, always 3, and silence after. One night, the bell tower rang by itself. The vicar found no one inside, only a faint smell of burnt tea leaves. The next morning, Thomas vanished. His house was empty, his bed cold, and his shoes neatly placed by the door. Only one message remained on the table, written in a shaking hand: "They never woke up." The note was taken as madness, but a constable who touched it reported hearing breathing from beneath the floorboards. His wife found him dead the next day, face pale, lips stained gray. After that, no one spoke of the orphanage again. The land was sold, but no buyer ever stayed longer than a month. Something always drove them away: a sickness, a sound, or simply the feeling of being watched. Yorkshire forgot the boy, but the curse remembered. By the late 1850s, the story of the orphanage had turned into a quiet warning. Parents told their children not to wander near the old fields, not to speak to strangers who smelled of tea, and never to accept gifts from the dead. But whispers persisted. Shepherds saw a child's figure walking across the moor at dusk, carrying a candle that never went out. They said it was Thomas, still searching for forgiveness. In 1861, a railway surveyor arrived to map the land for a new line that would cut directly through the orphanage ruins. He was warned, of course, but he laughed at the superstition. On his second night, he camped by the foundations. In his journal, later found buried in the mud, he wrote, "I heard 17 spoons clink against empty cups. No one ever found his body only his boots and the faint scent of arsenic around the fire pit. That discovery reignited the town's fear. The railway plan was abandoned, and the land was declared unfit for construction. Priests came again, performing rituals to bless the ground, but each blessing ended in failure. One fainted mid-prayer, another fell ill for weeks. The final priest refused to return, saying the field had its own prayers. The local children began daring each other to visit at night. One boy claimed he saw the outline of a dining table beneath the soil, with chairs still arranged as if waiting for dinner. He ran home crying, his tongue stained green. He didn't speak again for months. Authorities dismissed the tales as hysteria, yet the number of strange deaths grew. Animals were found arranged in circles, their bodies unmarked. Windows of nearby houses would frost from the inside during warm nights. And every year, around the anniversary, someone would hear knocking from underground. The town began aging faster as if something drained its breath. By 1870, only a few families remained. The rest moved south, leaving behind empty homes and unmarked graves. Among those who stayed was a woman named Mary Ellen, a caretaker's daughter who claimed she'd known Thomas as a child. She said he'd told her about a secret room beneath the orphanage, a place the caretakers used for punishment. She went searching for it one evening and never returned. When her brother found her lantern days later, it was still burning, though the wick was gone. They sealed the land again, this time with iron stakes and salt, but the silence that followed felt wrong, too heavy, too watchful. Travelers described feeling sick after crossing the area, as though their blood had thickened. The few who dared camp there woke with bruises shaped like small hands. One journal from 1875, written by a doctor who studied local mass hysteria, described the phenomenon as a shared memory of unfinished death. But his notes ended abruptly, the last line smudged and unreadable. No one ever identified the poison. No one proved who poured it. But Yorkshire carried the story like a wound, quiet, buried, and still bleeding beneath the years. In the autumn of 1876, a group of historians from London arrived in Yorkshire. They had heard the whispers of the cursed orphanage and wanted to uncover the truth behind the 17 deaths. Among them was a man named Arthur Linfield, a meticulous scholar who believed every legend hid a trace of reality. He carried maps, old parish ledgers, and a curiosity that locals warned him would be his undoing. Arthur ignored them. He said there was no such thing as haunted ground, only forgotten crimes. His team camped near the orphanage ruins, and from the moment they arrived, the air changed. Candles sputtered without wind, and compasses spun as if disoriented. On the second night, they uncovered a wooden trapdoor buried beneath the kitchen stones. It led to a chamber, small and circular, lined with bricks blackened by smoke. Inside were 17 small chairs, still upright, arranged around a cracked table. At the center sat an empty teacup covered in dust. Arthur examined it and whispered, "This was no accident." He found faint carvings on the table edge, initials that matched the victims' names. Each one scratched with desperate pressure, as if written during the final moments. The deeper they searched, the stranger the air became. One assistant, Henry Ward, began coughing violently. He said he could taste something bitter in the air, something metallic. Arthur ordered everyone out, fearing the chamber might still carry traces of arsenic. They sealed it and returned to camp. That night no one slept. The fire wouldn't light, and faint voices drifted from the ground, soft laughter, like children playing. One of the assistants swore he saw Thomas Whitby's face reflected in his pocket mirror. Arthur dismissed it as exhaustion, but unease had begun to sink into him too. The next morning he found small handprints on the outside of his tent, pressed into the fabric as if made from ash. They matched the size of a child's palm. Still Arthur pushed forward. He returned to the chamber alone, notebook in hand. The trapdoor resisted, but when it opened, the air that escaped was cold enough to frost his breath. On the table he found something new, a second teacup, wet and steaming, though no one had entered since the day before. He turned to flee but heard a faint voice behind him. "We drank for mercy." When he looked back, the chairs were filled. 17 pale faces watched him in silence, their eyes open, their lips moving soundlessly. Arthur dropped his lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. Hours later, his team found him collapsed beside the ruins, skin gray, veins dark as ink. His notes were soaked but legible. The last line read, "The condemned do not forgive." After that night, none of the team spoke publicly again. One went blind within weeks. Another hanged himself in London, leaving a note that said only, "Tea is served." The chamber was sealed once more by order of the parish, and Arthur's journal was locked away. But some said the voices never left the ground. that the soil itself had learned to whisper the story of the poisoned children. Yorkshire had forgotten nothing. It had only waited. The journal of Arthur Linfield never reached the archives. It vanished en route to London, only to reappear decades later in a private collection, its pages brittle and faintly stained with what experts called oxidized residue. Yet those who examined it claimed the stains moved, as if breathing. The words themselves seemed to fade and return depending on the reader's touch. A curator who studied it overnight was found unconscious at his desk, lips blue, lungs filled with fluid though no poison was detected. The journal was sealed again and returned to Yorkshire, but the locals refused to accept it. They said bringing it back would wake the ground once more. In 1883, a new landowner named Sir Rowland Beckett purchased the orphanage ruins, determined to erase the legend. He ordered the land cleared, the stones removed, the soil turned. Workers refused at first, demanding payment twice over. On the third day of digging, they uncovered a row of bones, small, delicate, perfectly aligned as if laid by hand. 17 sets. Sir Rowland demanded they continue, insisting it was coincidence. But as the digging deepened, the soil grew damp and smelled of metal. One worker screamed that he'd seen a child's face smiling beneath the mud. He quit that evening, walking home barefoot through the moor. Within days, he was dead, his veins darkened like Arthur's had been. The local doctor wrote unknown cause on the death certificate. Still, Sir Rowland persisted. He invited clergy to bless the field, but every candle extinguished itself before prayer began. On the final night, he decided to spend the evening alone on the property, journal in hand, determined to prove nothing was cursed. At midnight, his servants heard him shouting, then silence. When they entered the next morning, they found him seated at a table, 17 empty cups arranged before him, steam still rising. His eyes were open, pupils white, and his lips curved in a faint smile. The servants fled, and by evening, the entire estate had emptied. Investigators found no footprints except Sir Rowland's, yet the ground around the table was marked with small impressions, children's bare feet circling the table. His death was ruled natural, but the coroner resigned the next day. The table and cups were never seen again. Rumors claimed they were buried beneath the parish church. Others said they returned to the chamber on their own. The last record of the event came from a diary belonging to a maid who'd served Sir Rowland. She wrote, "They weren't poisoned by hands of men. They were called." After that, even the church fell silent. No one mentioned the orphanage for generations. The field grew over with thorns, the path forgotten, and Yorkshire carried on as though the land had healed. But travelers still reported seeing light where there should be none, hearing faint laughter beneath the wind, and smelling tea where there was no fire. The condemned had found a new host, the story itself. Every retelling stirred the ground again, and the earth, ever patient, waited for another listener to finish the tale. By the turn of the century, the story of the orphanage had drifted into folklore. Newspapers avoided it, clergy denied it, and maps quietly erased the field's name. Yet travelers kept disappearing near the moor, and their belongings, boots, rings, and torn journals, were always found arranged in a perfect circle. In 1901, a young scholar named Clara Whitfield began investigating the legend for her dissertation on psychic residue in historic tragedies. She traced the records of the 17 children, but found that each certificate had been signed by a different hand, all in identical ink, all dated the same minute, 3:11 a.m. No coroner worked at that hour. When Clara visited Yorkshire, locals refused to guide her. One old woman told her, "We buried them once. Don't dig again." But Clara persisted. She set camp near the ruins, taking soil samples, sketching foundations, recording temperatures. On her third night, the temperature dropped 14 degrees in minutes. Her lantern flickered though there was no wind. The next morning she found her notebook damp with tea stains. Her last entry read, "They are not asleep." No one ever saw her again. The university closed the case quietly, claiming exposure and fatigue, but her equipment was recovered weeks later. The compass inside pointed east, directly toward the field where Thomas Whitby once stood. The following winter, the parish church caught fire. Though no lightning struck, no candles burned. Witnesses swore they saw figures in the flames, children holding cups, smiling faintly as the roof collapsed. The bells melted but kept ringing until dawn. The ashes smelled of sugar and smoke. After that, superstition turned to fear. Families abandoned nearby homes, and within a decade, the area became a ghost village. Roads cracked, crops refused to grow, and water turned metallic. Travelers said the soil shimmered at night as if something beneath it breathed. The government sent inspectors in 1913. Their report simply read, "Uninhabitable. Ground emits toxins," but the truth was deeper. Locals knew the land wasn't poisoned, it was alive. The condemned had rooted themselves in the soil, their unfinished deaths feeding the ground. When the wind rose from the east, people claimed to hear 17 voices murmuring, counting backward from 17 to 1. In 1920, a farmer plowing the outskirts unearthed a porcelain cup with initials TW. The moment he touched it, his horses bolted, and the ground beneath him split open just enough to swallow the cup whole. He left Yorkshire that night and never returned. The field remained silent for years after, as if satisfied. But silence in Yorkshire never meant peace. Decades passed, and the world forgot what Yorkshire had buried. The wars came and went, the cities grew, and the land where the orphanage once stood turned into nothing more than a mark on an old map. But silence never meant safety. In 1952, an oil company purchased the field, intending to drill test wells. Machines arrived, heavy and modern, their noise drowning out the whispers of the moor. Workers laughed at the locals' warnings, joking that ghosts couldn't stop progress. On the third day, one of the drills struck something solid beneath the soil, not rock but wood. When they pulled the fragment out, it was a splintered tabletop, blackened and smelling faintly of tea. The foreman ordered it removed, but the workers refused to touch it. That night, the generator failed and the entire camp fell into darkness. Radios picked up faint static, followed by children's laughter echoing through the frequency. One operator claimed to hear a boy's voice whisper, "You woke us." By dawn, 3 workers were missing. Their helmets were found stacked neatly beside the drill, each filled halfway with water. The site was abandoned within a week. The company covered the incident with talk of gas leaks and equipment malfunction. But locals knew better. They said the ground was reclaiming what belonged to it. The abandoned machinery rusted in place, slowly sinking into the earth like offerings. In the following years, trespassers who entered the site reported feeling watched, their breath visible even in summer. Some saw shadows of children standing in rows, heads bowed, holding invisible cups. By 1960, the government fenced off the area entirely, labeling it a contamination zone. Yet contamination never explained the voices, or why every bird avoided flying over it. In 1972, an urban explorer named Peter Hollings recorded himself walking through the ruins. His footage showed flickering lights and faint music, like an old nursery rhyme sung off-key. His final words on tape were, "I can smell tea." He vanished that same night. The tape was found weeks later, melted at the edges as if burned from within. Investigators who watched it reported insomnia and nausea for months. One claimed he heard knocking from his television at night. After that, the footage was sealed and forgotten, labeled cultural hazard. In the years that followed, the land seemed to fade from memory again. Grass grew wild, swallowing the path, and fog became a permanent curtain. But legends never truly die, they wait. In 1993, a hiker discovered a fragment of porcelain in the mud, initials still visible, TW. When he touched it, his compass spun wildly, and the fog thickened until daylight vanished. He made it out by following the sound of his own heartbeat, but the porcelain was gone. He swore he heard children laughing behind him the whole time. The authorities dismissed it, but the report was quietly sealed under unexplained environmental event. And so the field slept again, holding its story beneath centuries of dirt and silence. But in Yorkshire, silence always hums with memory, and the memory of 17 poisoned souls never fades. It only waits for the next curious hand to disturb its rest. By the early 2000s, the story of the Yorkshire orphanage returned in fragments. Urban myths told in classrooms, ghost forums, and local pubs. People called it the Field of Mercy, though no one could explain why. In 2003, a documentary crew from Manchester decided to investigate the legend for a television special on haunted sites. The team of 5 arrived in late October, armed with digital cameras, voice recorders, and thermal scanners. Locals warned them not to film after midnight, but the crew laughed it off. On their first night, they recorded nothing unusual, only long stretches of fog and static. On the second night, the lead producer, Diane Rowe, reported hearing teacups clinking in the dark. Her crew dismissed it until their microphones began picking up faint whispers under the static, children counting backward from 17. Diane rewound the tape several times. Each time the voices grew louder, closer, and one phrase repeated clearly, "We drank for mercy." The team continued filming, but strange malfunctions began. Batteries drained instantly, lenses fogged from inside, and the air turned bitter cold. When they packed up, one of the assistants noticed footprints circling their van, bare, small, and freshly pressed into the frost. The next morning, Diane's camera was missing. It was later found near the ruins. Lens cracked but still recording. The footage showed her walking into the fog following a child's voice calling her name. She was never seen again. The police searched for weeks, but no trace was found. The remaining footage from that night contained 17 frames of a long dining table surrounded by shadowy figures. Experts declared it digital interference, but technicians swore the shadows blinked. The documentary was canceled, and the tapes were sealed by order of the broadcasting company. Years later, an intern leaked fragments online. Viewers reported nausea, insomnia, and one case of fainting after watching. The audio contained a faint hum matching the pitch of ringing church bells, exactly at 3:11 a.m. Scientists who analyzed it couldn't explain the origin. Some said it was feedback from underground electrical currents. Others called it a hoax. But locals recognized the tone instantly. It was the bell from the old parish, the one that had melted in the fire of 1920. The mystery deepened when a researcher named Emily Carter cross-referenced old parish logs and found something extraordinary. Every recorded tragedy linked to the HS field occurred precisely 70 years apart, 1843, 1913, and 1983, each ending with the same phrase in local reports: mercy for the condemned. Emily published her findings in an independent journal, but within a month, the publication was scrubbed from archives. The editor resigned, citing unexplained interference. He later claimed his home printer began producing pages filled with the words, "We never woke up." No one ever located Emily after that. The legend entered digital folklore, spreading across forums and social media. Some users reported receiving corrupted emails with attachments named T.mp3, containing distorted sounds of liquid pouring and soft laughter. Each file timestamp read 3:11 a.m. Authorities dismissed it as coincidence, yet the whispers of Yorkshire grew louder online. What once was a local curse had become a digital haunting, one that traveled through screens instead of soil, carrying the same unfinished sorrow. In 2021, a YouTuber named Thomas Wainwright, ironically sharing the same initials as the forgotten Orphan, TW, decided to create a full-length documentary on the Field of Mercy. Known for exploring unsolved mysteries, Thomas wasn't a skeptic, but he didn't believe in ghosts either. His plan was simple: spend 72 hours at the old site, film everything, and prove the legends false. He brought drones, motion sensors, and 2 friends to assist. On the first day, they pitched their tents near the rusted fence. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet moss. Thomas documented his opening monologue: "We're standing on history, not horror." The footage was crisp, professional, and calm. That calm didn't last. The second night, at exactly 3:11 a.m., every device flickered to life. The drone camera, which had been turned off, began transmitting without command. Its feed showed the 3 men sleeping, but a 4th shadow moved among them, tall and thin, pausing to stare directly into the lens. When Thomas replayed the footage, his voice shook. "There's no one else here." By morning, one of his friends refused to stay and left. Thomas and the remaining assistant continued, trying to rationalize everything as wind, condensation, or interference. But that evening, the ground around the tent grew damp and the temperature dropped sharply. From somewhere in the fog came a faint metallic ringing, the same tone recorded in Diane's tapes 18 years earlier. Thomas whispered, "That's the bell." His assistant turned the camera toward the sound. The fog thickened until shapes appeared, children sitting cross-legged in rows, cups in hand. Their eyes were hollow, and their mouths moved in perfect silence. The camera captured Thomas stepping closer, whispering, "What mercy?" The feed cut to static. Hours later, the assistant was found wandering a mile away, barefoot, muttering the same phrase: "We drank for mercy." Thomas was never recovered. His final upload appeared 3 days later on his channel without description. The thumbnail showed an old wooden table lit by candlelight. When viewers clicked, the video played only 5 seconds of audio, a deep hum, followed by a soft voice saying, "He joined us." The account was deleted an hour later, and no one could trace the IP. Cyber forensics experts claimed the data was overwritten by an unknown format not compatible with any existing encoding system. Yet fragments of the upload spread. Those who listened to it reported identical symptoms: dizziness, nausea, and vivid dreams of sitting at a long table surrounded by children whispering numbers. After a few weeks, forums tracking the mystery noticed a disturbing pattern. Every new viewer who reported hearing the audio at exactly 3:11 a.m. vanished from online activity within 70 hours. Their profiles went dark. Their devices pinged from unknown coordinates across Yorkshire moors. Authorities issued statements denying any link, calling it viral hysteria. But in 2023, a local historian uncovered a letter from 1843 hidden inside the parish ruins. It was signed Thomas Wainwright, the same name as the YouTuber. The letter read, "We sleep beside mercy, not God." The handwriting was authenticated as 19th century ink. No rational explanation followed. Experts attempted to disprove the connection, but couldn't explain how the name reappeared across centuries, or how every 70 years the story renewed itself. Some said it wasn't a curse but a cycle, a loop repeating through anyone who dared to disturb the peace of the 17. And if you ever find yourself near Yorkshire's moors and hear a faint bell at 3:11 a.m., remember, mercy was never meant for the living. By 2025, the tale of the forgotten orphan had evolved into something beyond folklore. It had become a mirror for every unanswered question about mercy, sin, and justice. Historians called it a moral distortion, a tragedy consumed by superstition. But for the people of Yorkshire, it was never superstition. It was inheritance. They grew up hearing stories whispered by grandparents, of candles that lit themselves, of church bells that rang when the wind stood still, of an orphan whose mercy turned into a curse. Every child knew not to walk near the old cemetery after dusk, yet each generation produced one who did. And each time someone vanished. Those who tried to rebuild the chapel found their blueprints erased overnight, their equipment rusted beyond repair by morning dew. Contractors refused the project, claiming they heard voices beneath the soil saying, "Let us sleep." Scientists, priests, and paranormal experts visited, but none stayed longer than a night. The place wasn't violent. It was patient. It waited. In the archives of the Wakefield Historical Society, a new document surfaced, a parish record from 1844, written in shaky handwriting by a Reverend Miles Ainsworth. It described an orphan named Thomas, rescued after the poisoning, who refused to speak for 7 months. When he finally did, his first words were, "They drank what I gave." The Reverend noted he showed no remorse, only confusion, as if he couldn't remember mixing the poison at all. The entry ended abruptly with, "He asked to sleep beside them." The rest of the page was smeared black. Centuries later, psychologists analyzed the case through the lens of trauma, arguing the boy must have been a victim of abuse, not the perpetrator. Yet local legends disagreed. They said the boy wasn't poisoned by chemicals but by guilt, that he carried something darker than arsenic in his veins. Diane's final tape echoed that same sentiment. "Mercy is a lie we tell the dying." The words resonated across forums and podcasts, evolving into an eerie proverb. Artists painted the orphan with closed eyes. Journalists turned him into a cautionary tale about faith and fanaticism. But the truth, the real truth, was quieter. Those who visited the ruins described a feeling that went beyond fear. It wasn't dread or panic, but recognition, as though they had always known this story, lived it, and forgotten. One visitor in 2019 wrote, "It felt like remembering a nightmare I didn't have." And maybe that was the essence of the tale. Not a ghost story, not a haunting, but a memory trapped in the soil, replaying itself through whoever came close enough to listen. The field where 17 poisoned bodies once lay is now just grass, uneven and pale. Cows graze there sometimes. Tourists pass without knowing what rests beneath. But if you stay until twilight, the air grows thick, and you can almost hear the rustle of fabric, the clink of tin cups, and the faintest whisper, "Drink for mercy." Then everything goes silent again, as if the land itself exhales. Maybe Thomas was real, maybe he was legend. But either way, his story became a vessel for something ancient, an unending cycle of guilt, death, and forgiveness twisted together. What was mercy to a world that buried children? What was salvation to those who were never remembered? Perhaps the curse wasn't theirs at all. Perhaps it belonged to us, for forgetting. In the end, the story of the orphan became more than a piece of Yorkshire folklore. It became a test of what humanity chooses to forget. The locals stopped speaking his name after the last investigation closed, fearing that saying it out loud might wake whatever still lingered beneath the chapel ruins. Yet silence never killed a story. It only buried it deeper. And some nights, when the fog rolls in thick and low, villagers claim to see a flicker of lantern light moving between the gravestones, pausing before the 17th cross, the one without a name. They say if you watch long enough, a small shadow kneels beside it, resting its head against the earth as if listening for forgiveness that never comes. In 2024, a journalist named Evelyn Carter published a piece titled, "The Orphan's Mercy." She'd spent months collecting diaries, letters, and testimonies from those who had dared to approach the field. Every witness described the same thing: the faint smell of burnt sugar, the echo of laughter fading into crying, and a sudden drop in temperature precisely at 3:11 a.m. Evelyn never concluded whether it was supernatural or psychological. But her final paragraph read, "Mercy was their poison, and it still runs through Yorkshire's rain." After her article went viral, she vanished on a return visit to the site. Her camera was later found submerged in a nearby creek. The last frame captured a blurred figure kneeling beside her car, pale, barefoot, and wearing 19th century linen. The photo was dismissed as exposure error, but those who enhanced it swore they saw two faces merged, one belonging to Evelyn and one to a child. Officials sealed the area once again, labeling it unsafe due to unstable terrain. But that didn't stop believers. They still come, leaving cups of milk and candles at the chapel's edge, whispering the same words etched on the old wooden cross: "Forgive the mercy." Some claim it's an act of faith. Others say it's fear disguised as worship. The story persists not because it was proven, but because it never ended. And maybe that's the real haunting, the way some tragedies refuse to die. As long as someone remembers, the orphan still breathes. His face appears in dreams, in static screens, in the spaces between thunder and silence. He doesn't ask for pity or prayer. He asks only one thing: would you have forgiven me? The question hangs heavy in the air, timeless, unanswered. Because in truth, mercy and guilt are mirrors. One reflects innocence, the other the cost of pretending it exists. When dawn breaks over Yorkshire, the mist rises gently, revealing nothing but grass and soil. But beneath that calm lies the unmarked grave of a story that will not rest. The 17 still sleep, the boy still watches, and those who listen too closely may find their own reflection staring back, lips pale, whispering, "We drank what we gave." Some legends are born of blood, others of silence. This one was born of mercy, and mercy once poisoned can never be pure again. So if you ever wander those fields and the wind carries a soft hum through the grass, don't look back. Don't follow the light. Just walk away, because mercy remembers, and it waits.